In this section, we're going to start setting up Ingress Nginx on our local project. We're actually going to follow the setup directions that are tied directly to the GitHub repository. So to get started, I'm going to first navigate to this address right here. So github.com kubernetes/ingress nginx. And then once here, I'm going to find the link to the documentation at the very top. So this link right here. Then once on the home page, I'll find the deployment tab at the very top. And we're going to walk through this installation guide together. Now the installation guide is a little bit confusing, which is why we're going to walk through it together. So the first thing that we want to find is generic deployment. We have to go through this mandatory command right here for any of the other deployment targets. So even if we're trying to deploy to Azure or GCE or AWS, whatever it is, we have to execute this mandatory command right here. So we can take that command, copy paste it, and then run it inside of our terminal. But before we do, I want to very quickly show you what is going on behind the scenes with the command. So I encourage you to copy the link that's listed right here. You'll notice that at the very end, it's actually a YAML file. So it's a config file very similar to all the config files that you and I have been creating throughout this course. Then inside of my browser, I'm going to visit the link to that config file like so. And so you're going to see something very quickly pop up. This is all the config that is going to be executed when we try to set up this Ingress Nginx project locally. Now, there's a couple of different objects inside of here that are going to be created that I just want to very quickly point out to you. You'll notice that the first thing that is created right here is something called a namespace. A namespace is used to kind of isolate the different resources that we are creating inside of our Kubernetes cluster. And it's something we'll discuss just a little bit later on. Immediately after that, we'll see a deployment with the name of default HTTP backend. So again, this is a little deployment right here that is going to be created for us that's going to essentially serve as a health check and tell the Nginx pod that, yeah, our cluster is working the way that is expected to work. We can certainly omit this step right here and skip the default HTTP backend if we want to. The only thing that we have to do is to make sure that we instead point it at some other image that's going to, first off, serve a 404 page at the root route, and second off, serve a 200 on the /healthz route. So again, we could certainly implement these two steps right here inside of our multi-server pod if we had wanted to. That means that we would not have to create this default backend. But again, we're going to make use of the default backend just to save ourselves a tiny bit of work. Now, as you scroll down a little bit further, you're going to see that we get a service created for the default backend. After that, you're going to see a couple of different things called config maps. Config maps are essentially objects that hold some amount of configuration that can be used throughout our cluster. We're not going to be too concerned with that stuff right now, so I'm going to keep on going. Past the service account, service account, past the cluster role. We're going to go down towards the very bottom and eventually find the deployment with the name of Nginx Ingress controller. So again, in just this project that we're making use of, just this Ingress Nginx project, the Ingress controller and the thing that is accepting incoming traffic is actually one singular object. So just with this one particular project, those two things kind of get merged together or sandwiched into this one single thing. And so if you look at the config for this object right here, you're going to see inside the containers definition that it's essentially starting up a copy of Nginx, but simultaneously, it's also going to read in some amount of config that tells this copy or this controller exactly how the Nginx copy should be configured. So that's all going on inside this config right here. You'll also see that there's some configuration that customizes that liveliness probe on the healthz route and also sets up the 404 somewhere inside of here on the root route as well, although I'm not immediately seeing it. Okay, so enough of that. Let's go back over to the installation guide. Again, I'm going to copy the entire mandatory command, and then I'll go into my terminal, and I'm going to paste that and run it like so. Now we're going to very quickly see a huge variety of different objects be created. So we'll just kind of leave that for right now. Before we continue, we have to go through one other setup step, specifically for Minikube. So back up here, I'm going to click on Minikube. And then it tells us that for standard usage, which is what we are doing, all we have to do is run this command right here, which says Minikube add-ons enable ingress. So I'm going to copy that command, go back over to my terminal, and I'm going to make sure I copy it this time. There we go. And then we should see that Ingress was successfully enabled. Now, the very last thing that I want to show you, you'll recall that I just told you that on Google Cloud, a load balancer service is actually going to be created. And that load balancer service is going to simultaneously create the external load balancer for us as well. So as a little sneak peek, if you want to, you could scroll on down to the configuration for GCE right here. And then again, you can copy the link to the config file for GCE. And then if you open that up in a new tab again, this is what is going to be created specifically on Google Cloud. And so as you'll notice, it is in fact a service that has type load balancer. And so specifically on Google Cloud, a load balancer is created to route traffic into your application through the use of a load balancer service. I thought that was just a little bit interesting because, even though we're saying, oh yeah, load balancers are a little bit dated as a service in the world of Kubernetes, even this newer feature of Ingress is still using a load balancer behind the scenes. So again, I just thought it was a little bit interesting. All right, so that's all we had to do to set up the Ingress locally. So let's take a quick pause right here. When we come back to the next section, we're going to start to configure our Ingress resource. So quick pause, and I'll see you in just a minute.